30 years on the Millfield Police Department taught me that some cases are meant to stay closed, no matter how many families come asking for answers. I've got a filing cabinet in my basement filled with reports that were never officially filed. Missing hikers who were found with no memory of where they'd been for 3 weeks. Livestock mutilations that followed patterns no animal could make. And children who came back from the woods speaking languages that don't exist. The worst part about retirement isn't the boredom or the pension checks. It's knowing that my replacement doesn't understand why certain roads shouldn't be patrolled after midnight, or why we always responded to calls from Sycamore Street in pairs. Last week I heard on the scanner that a rookie found something in the old Hartwell barn that made him quit the force the same day. I haven't slept well since. My name is Reginald Cole, and I came to Millfield in 1994 after what happened in Cleveland ate through my marriage and my sanity. 3 kids found dead in the basement of an abandoned house on East 55th. Throats torn out, arranged in a circle around symbols carved into the concrete floor. The newspapers called it a cult killing. We knew better. The thing we cornered in that basement wasn't human, and when it spoke in my partner's voice right before we put 6 rounds in its chest, something broke inside me that never healed. Martha begged me to transfer somewhere quiet, somewhere normal. Millfield seemed perfect. Population 2,847, surrounded by rolling farmland and thick forests that stretched toward the Hocking Hills. Chief Brennan hired me sight unseen, said they needed someone with big city experience to help modernize their small-town department. What he didn't mention during our phone interview was that no field sits on what the old-timers call soft ground, places where reality wears thin, where things that shouldn't exist find ways to slip through. The Shawnee avoided this area for generations, and the German settlers who first cleared these forests in the 1840s left behind more graves than living descendants. By my second week, I'd learned why the previous officer had taken early retirement after finding 3 families of hikers wandering State Route 664 naked and speaking backwards. Chief Brennan handed me a folded piece of paper that day, yellowed with age and covered in careful handwriting. "These aren't suggestions, Koala," he said, watching me read. "Follow them exactly, or Millfield will chew you up like it did Officer Henderson." The paper contained 7 protocols that kept our small department functional in a place where the normal rules didn't apply. I followed them religiously for 3 decades, watched them save my life more times than I can count, and passed them down to every rookie who lasted more than a month. Now that I'm out, I figure it's time someone else knew why we did what we did, and why Deputy Collins should have listened when I tried to warn him about the Hartwell property. The first protocol seemed simple enough when Chief Brennan explained it. Never patrol Black Run Road between 2:17 a.m. and 4:33 a.m. on nights when the moon is less than half full. The specificity should have been my first warning that someone had learned these timings the hard way. "Why those exact times?" I asked, settling into the creaky wooden chair across from his desk. The Millfield police station occupied the bottom floor of what used to be the town's grain elevator, and everything still smelled faintly of wheat dust and motor oil. Brennan pulled out a manila folder thick with incident reports. Officer Kowalski found out in '87, responded to a call about suspicious lights on that stretch near the old Pemberton farm. Dispatch lost radio contact at 2:20 a.m. He slid a photograph across the desk. We found his cruiser 3 days later, wrapped around an oak tree that's been dead for 15 years. The photo showed a mangled Ford Crown Victoria, its front end accordion folded against gray bark. What made my stomach tighten wasn't the damage. I'd seen worse accidents in Cleveland. It was the way the metal had twisted, forming shapes that reminded me of reaching fingers. Where was Kowalski? Sitting in the driver's seat, talking to his radio like nothing happened. Problem was, he'd been speaking to dispatch for 6 hours straight, reporting locations that don't exist. We had recordings of him describing streets with names like Wormwood Lane and Cemetery Row, places that were never built in Millfield. I studied the photo more closely. Something about the tree bothered me, but I couldn't place what. Was he injured? Not a scratch. But he kept insisting that his patrol had lasted 12 minutes, not 3 days. Medical evaluation found severe dehydration and signs of prolonged exposure. But Kowalski swore he'd just started his shift. Brennan leaned back, the chair springs protesting. He retired the following week, moved to Florida, and refused to talk about what happened. That afternoon, I drove out to Black Run Road to see it for myself. The asphalt stretched through rolling hills covered in soybean fields, nothing more threatening than a few weathered barns and crooked fence posts. The Pemberton farm sat about 2 miles in, marked by a rusted mailbox that leaned like a broken tooth. The dead oak stood exactly where the police report indicated, 30 feet from the road's edge. Someone had cleaned up the accident scene years ago, but I could still see gouges in the bark where metal had bitten deep. What struck me wasn't the damage. It was how the tree seemed to twist in directions that hurt to follow with my eyes, branches reaching toward the ground while roots arched skyward. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. Safe enough. Walking closer, I noticed something carved into the trunk about shoulder height. The marks looked fresh despite the tree's obvious death, forming symbols that made me think of the basement in Cleveland. My radio crackled with static, and for just a moment, I heard what sounded like Kowalski's voice reporting his location on a street that didn't exist. The sensation passed quickly, but it left my skin crawling. I photographed the symbols and headed back to town, making a mental note to research the Pemberton property's history. That evening at Murphy's Tavern, the only bar in Millfield, I bought drinks for a few local farmers and asked casual questions about Black Run Road. Most just shrugged and mentioned occasional deer strikes, but old Earl Buchanan, whose family had been farming here since the 1920s, leaned in close after his third beer. "My granddad used to say that road remembers things," he whispered, glancing around to make sure nobody else was listening. "Told me the Shawnee called it the Path of Echoes. Said time got stuck there sometimes, like a record with a skip." "Stuck how?" Earl drained his beer and stood up. "Ask Kowalski if you can find him. Though I heard tell he don't answer his phone no more." He dropped a 5 on the bar and headed for the door, then paused. "Just remember, Deputy, some things in this county been here longer than the roads we built over them." I finished my drink alone, studying the photo of those carved symbols and wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. They helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. The second protocol hit closer to home. When responding to domestic disturbance calls on Sycamore Street, always bring backup and never enter a residence alone, regardless of how minor the complaint seems. If the caller mentions family visiting from out of town, request immediate assistance from the sheriff's department. I learned this one the hard way during my 3rd month in Millfield. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in February 1995. Dorothy Hartwell's voice crackling through the dispatch radio with complaints about loud music and shouting from her neighbor's house at 247 Sycamore. Nothing unusual. Domestic calls made up half our workload, especially during the winter months when cabin fever set in. Mrs. Hartwell says the Kowalczyk family has been playing polka music since midnight. Linda, our dispatcher, reported with barely concealed amusement. Apparently, they're having some kind of family reunion. I knew the Kowalczyks, quiet Polish family, been farming the same plot for 40 years. Stefan worked third shift at the lumber mill, while his wife Agnes ran a small greenhouse behind their house. They had twin daughters who'd graduated valedictorian and salutatorian the year before I arrived. The idea of them throwing an all-night party struck me as bizarre. The drive to Sycamore Street took 15 minutes through neighborhoods lined with modest ranch houses and snow-covered gardens. Number 247 sat at the end of a dead-end street, backed up against the tree line of Miller's Woods. Even from the road, I could hear accordion music drifting from the house, accompanied by what sounded like dozens of people singing in Polish. Strange, considering Stefan's car was the only vehicle in the driveway. I knocked on the front door, badge visible, calling out in my practiced, friendly but official voice. The music stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps moving around inside. Someone whispered in rapid Polish, then Agnes opened the door. She looked exactly like herself. Same graying hair tied back in a practical bun. Same flour-dusted apron she wore when working in the greenhouse. But something about her smile made my chest tighten. It stretched too wide, revealing teeth I'd never noticed before, and her eyes held a brightness that seemed painted on. "Officer Kola, what a wonderful surprise. Please, come in and meet our family." Through the doorway, I could see the living room packed with people. All of them bore a family resemblance to Agnes and Stefan. Same high cheekbones, same pale blue eyes, same platinum blonde hair. They ranged in age from children to elderly grandparents, maybe 30 people in total, all staring at me with identical bright smiles. The problem was that Stefan had mentioned to me, just weeks earlier, that both his parents had died in Poland during the war, and Agnes came from a family of 3 sisters who'd never had children. "Actually, Mrs. Kowalczyk, I just need to speak with you about the noise complaint. Maybe we could talk outside." Agnes's smile wavered for just a moment. "Oh, but our family has traveled so far to see us. Some have come from places that don't exist anymore." She gestured toward the crowded room. "Please, just for a minute." That phrase, "places that don't exist anymore," sent warning bells through my head. I stepped back from the threshold, hand instinctively moving toward my radio. "I appreciate the invitation, but I need to check on a few other things first. Could you just keep the music down after 10 p.m.? The entire room full of people turned to look at me in perfect synchronization, their heads moving like they were connected by invisible strings. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, waved at me with fingers that bent in too many places. "Of course, officer," Agnes said, but her voice had changed. It sounded layered now, like multiple people speaking in harmony. "We understand completely. Family visits can be overwhelming." I made it back to my cruiser without running, but just barely. My hands shook as I radioed for backup, then sat in the driver's seat watching the house. Through the windows, I could see the family moving around, but their shadows on the walls didn't match their movements. Some cast multiple shadows, others cast none at all. Deputy Martinez arrived 20 minutes later with a thermos of coffee and a confused expression. "What's the situation, Coley?" "Welfare check," I said, not wanting to sound crazy. Something feels off about this call. We approached the house together. This time, when Agnes answered the door, she looked normal again, tired, apologetic, wearing different clothes. The house behind her was empty except for Stefan, who sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. "I'm so sorry about earlier, Officer Kola," she said, wringing her hands. "I think I was sleepwalking. Stefan found me talking to myself by the front door around 9 a.m. I don't remember making any noise complaints." Stefan looked up from his paper, genuine confusion on his face. What noise complaint? We went to bed at 10 last night, same as always. Martinez and I exchanged glances. I walked through the house with Stefan's permission, checking every room. No sign of a party, no accordion, no crowd of relatives. The only odd detail was that every family photograph in the house now showed just Agnes and Stefan, with no evidence that their daughters had ever existed. That afternoon, Chief Brennan found me staring at my incident report, trying to figure out how to write up something that made no sense. "Let me guess," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The Kowalczyks had visitors. How did you—" "Happens every few years. Always the same story. Family reunion with relatives who don't exist, then complete amnesia about the whole thing." He pulled out another manila folder. "Started in 1962, according to the files. Previous owners, the Novaks, reported the same pattern. Before that, it was the Muellers." I flipped through photographs of different families, different decades, but the same basic story repeated over and over. What's causing it? Best theory comes from Father Mackenzie at St. Bartholomew's. He thinks the house sits on what he calls thin ground, places where memories from different times bleed through. Brennan pointed to an old survey map. Sycamore Street was built over the site of a displaced persons camp from right after World War II. Lots of families separated by the war, lots of people who never found their relatives again. I studied the map, noting how the camp's layout matched the current street grid almost exactly. So, what am I supposed to do if this happens again? "Follow Protocol 2, Brennan said. "Never go in alone, and if they mention visitors from out of town, call for serious backup." The last officer who ignored that advice spent 3 days inside the house before we found him, talking to empty chairs and setting places at the dinner table for people who'd been dead for 50 years. The third protocol took me 6 months to fully understand. If you receive 3 or more missing person reports within a 48-hour period, and all the missing individuals were last seen near Miller's Woods, do not organize a search party. Instead, place orange traffic cones at every trailhead leading into the forest and wait exactly 72 hours. They will return on their own, but never approach them directly for the first week after their reappearance. The protocol seemed ridiculous until the Henderson family disappeared during the spring of 1996. It started on a Saturday morning when Carol Henderson called to report that her husband Bill hadn't come home from his usual morning jog. Bill ran the same route every day, down Maple Street, past the old cemetery, then along the trail that skirted the edge of Miller's Woods, before looping back through downtown Millfield. "He's been running that route for 12 years, Carol said, pacing the small lobby of our station. Never missed a morning, not even when he had the flu. His coffee was still warm when I woke up, but he'd been gone 3 hours." I took the initial report, noting that Bill was a creature of habit who owned Henderson's hardware store on Main Street. Reliable, predictable, the kind of man who checked his tire pressure every Sunday and balanced his checkbook to the penny. Not the type to vanish without explanation. 2 hours later, Sarah Brennan, the chief's daughter, called in hysterics. Her boyfriend Jake Morrison had gone hiking in Miller's Woods Friday evening and never returned. She'd waited until morning to call, assuming he'd crashed at a friend's house, but none of his buddies had seen him. "Jake knows those trails better than anyone," Sarah sobbed into the phone. "He's been hiking there since he was 10. Something's wrong." Before I could finish taking Sarah's statement, the phone rang again. This time it was elderly Mrs. Chen from Willow Avenue, reporting that her grandson Tommy had disappeared while walking their dog near the woods. The dog had returned home alone, whimpering and refusing to go near the back door that faced the forest. 3 missing persons in 18 hours, all connected to Miller's Woods. I pulled out the protocol sheet Chief Brennan had given me and found number 3. When I showed the protocol to Brennan, he nodded grimly and pulled out a box of orange traffic cones from the storage closet. "You think we should just wait?" I asked, watching him load the cones into his truck. 3 people are missing. Shouldn't we be organizing search teams, calling in the state police? "Read the reports from '89, Brennan said, handing me another thick folder. Deputy Walsh ignored this protocol, lost 4 volunteers and 2 search dogs before we figured out what was happening. The 1989 incident files made for disturbing reading. 6 people had vanished from the woods over a weekend in October. 2 hunters, a family of campers, and a local teenager named David Kowalski. Deputy Walsh had organized massive search efforts involving volunteers from 3 counties, search and rescue teams, even a helicopter from the National Guard. The search teams had found abandoned campsites with food still cooking over smoldering fires, footprints that led in circles for miles without reaching any destination, and trees marked with symbols that matched the ones I'd seen carved into the dead oak on Black Run Road. But no trace of the missing people. What made my skin crawl were the incident reports from the searchers themselves. Multiple volunteers reported hearing their names called from deep in the woods, always in the voices of the missing people. Search dogs would follow trails that led to clearings where they'd whine and refuse to continue, hackles raised, staring at empty air. On the 4th day of searching, 2 volunteers disappeared. Their radios went silent simultaneously at 11:47 a.m., and when the remaining teams reached their last known position, they found both men's equipment arranged in a perfect circle around a tree that local botanists couldn't identify. By the end of the week, Deputy Walsh had lost 4 searchers and called off the operation. 6 days later, all 9 missing people emerged from the woods at different locations around the county, walking calmly down country roads with no memory of where they'd been. They all told the same story, Brennan explained as we drove toward Miller's Woods with our load of traffic cones. Said they'd only been in the woods for an hour or 2, insisted it was still the same day they'd gone in, even though a week had passed. We placed cones at every trail entrance, 12 in total, marking them with official police department tape. The forest itself looked normal. Dense stands of oak and maple just beginning to turn autumn colors, undergrowth thick with wild raspberry bushes and fallen logs. Nothing threatening about it, except for the way it seemed to absorb sound. Even standing at the tree line, I couldn't hear any of the normal forest noises. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the brush. The waiting was harder than any active investigation I'd ever worked. Carol Henderson called every 4 hours asking for updates. Sarah Brennan camped out in the station lobby, drinking coffee and staring at the clock. Mrs. Chan brought homemade dumplings and sat quietly in the corner, clutching a photograph of her grandson. On Sunday evening, exactly 67 hours after Bill Henderson's disappearance, Linda radioed that a farmer had spotted someone walking down County Road 14, about 2 miles east of the woods. I drove out to find Bill jogging casually along the shoulder, wearing the same clothes he'd left home in 3 days earlier. "Bill!" I called out, pulling over. "Are you all right?" He stopped and looked at me with mild confusion. "Oh, hey, Officer Cola. Yeah, I'm fine. Just finishing up my morning run." He checked his watch and frowned. "Though I must be running slower than usual. This feels like it's taking forever." I looked at my own watch. 7:23 p.m. Sunday. Bill had been missing since Saturday morning, but he genuinely seemed to believe he was still on his regular jog. "Bill, what day is it?" "Saturday, September 14th. Beautiful morning for a run." He gestured toward the sunset, painting the sky orange and red. "Though the light's weird today. Almost looks like evening." Within the next 8 hours, Jake Morrison and Tommy Chen both turned up, walking along different roads that bordered the woods. Same story. No memory of lost time, insisting they'd only been gone for minutes, confused by the change in light and weather. Chief Brennan pulled me aside Monday morning, while the three families celebrated their reunions. "Notice anything different about them?" he asked quietly. I had, but didn't want to admit it. All three returned, people moved slightly differently. More fluid, like they were floating an inch above the ground. Their blink rates seemed off, too slow, and when they spoke, there was a faint echo, as if their voices were coming from somewhere slightly behind them. "The protocol says not to approach them directly for a week," I said. "There's a reason for that. Watch them from a distance, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary. And whatever you do, don't ask them what they remember from their time in the woods." I spent the next week observing all three from afar. Bill Henderson reopened his hardware store but couldn't remember how to operate the cash register he'd used for 15 years. Jake Morrison kept trying to unlock his car with a house key, pressing it against the window like he'd forgotten how doors worked. Tommy Chen spoke only in whispers and refused to eat anything except white rice. By the following Monday, they seemed to return to normal. Mostly. But sometimes I'd catch them staring at Miller's Woods with expressions of longing, like they were homesick for a place they couldn't remember visiting. The worst part was the dreams. Starting about 2 weeks after their return, all three began having the same recurring nightmare. They'd find themselves standing in a clearing deep in the woods, surrounded by dozens of other people. Some they recognized as missing persons from previous years, others they'd never seen before. In the dream, everyone was waiting for something, though none of them could remember what. Mrs. Chen mentioned the dreams to me during a chance encounter at Miller's grocery. "Tommy wakes up crying," she whispered, glancing around to make sure nobody was listening. "Says he misses his friends in the forest, but he can't remember their faces when he's awake." That night, I drove out to Miller's Woods and parked at the main trailhead. The orange cones were still in place, though several had been moved a few feet closer to the tree line. I sat in my cruiser for an hour, windows down, listening to the absolute silence that surrounded the forest. Just before midnight, I heard something that made me start the engine and drive home without looking back. The faint sound of dozens of people singing in harmony, coming from somewhere deep in the trees where no people should have been. Hi everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The 4th protocol haunted our department for good reason. If you receive emergency calls claiming to originate from 1247 Riverside Drive, do not respond. This address was destroyed in the 1969 flood and no longer exists. Log the call as a false report, but under no circumstances should you attempt to verify the caller's identity or ask for callback information. If the caller mentions they can see you through their window, immediately evacuate the station and do not return for at least 4 hours. I discovered this protocol during my first winter storm as a Millfield officer, December 1996. The blizzard had been pounding us for 18 hours, dropping nearly 2 feet of snow and knocking out power to half the county. I was pulling a double shift because Deputy Martinez couldn't make it in from his farm, and Linda had gone home early when the roads became treacherous. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and a pile of paperwork in the old grain elevator that served as our station. At 11:43 p.m., the phone rang. Millfield Police, Officer Cole speaking. The voice that answered was elderly, female, with the careful pronunciation of someone who'd learned English as a second language. Officer, thank goodness. This is Mrs. Kostadinov at 1247 Riverside Drive. Someone is trying to break into my house. I grabbed a pen and started writing down the details. Riverside Drive sat in the older part of town, near where Raccoon Creek wound past the abandoned mill. Mostly retirees and young families, quiet neighborhood where break-ins were rare. Can you describe the suspect, ma'am? It's a man in dark clothes. He's been walking around my house for 20 minutes, trying the doors and windows. I'm very scared. My husband is away visiting his sister in Columbus, and I'm here alone. Something about her voice bothered me. Not what she was saying, but the quality of the sound. It seemed to echo slightly, like she was calling from inside a tunnel. I chopped it up to the storm, interfering with the phone lines. I'll be right there, Mrs. Kostadinov. Lock your doors and stay away from the windows. What's your first name? From my report. Ivanka. Please hurry, officer. He's at the back door now. I bundled up in my winter gear and headed out into the storm. The drive to Riverside Drive took twice as long as usual, my cruiser sliding through intersections where the snow had drifted 3 feet deep. The whole town was dark except for occasional flickers of candlelight in windows. When I reached Riverside Drive, I found a problem. The street ended at number 1231. Beyond that, there was nothing but an empty lot that sloped down toward the frozen creek. No house, no driveway, no mailbox. Just an expanse of snow-covered ground, dotted with a few foundation stones. I parked and walked the area with my flashlight, thinking maybe I had miscounted the house numbers. But 1247 would have been exactly where the empty lot sat, about 50 yards from the creek bank. I checked my notes twice, then radioed dispatch. Linda, this is Cole. I'm at the reported address on Riverside Drive, but there's no house here. Can you confirm the caller's information? Static answered me. The radio was completely dead. I tried my cell phone but couldn't get a signal. The storm must have knocked out more infrastructure than we'd realized. Walking back toward my cruiser, I noticed something that made me stop and study the ground more carefully. In the fresh snow, there were footprints. 2 sets. One that looked like women's boots, small and neat, and another that belonged to a man wearing work boots. The prints circled the empty lot in a pattern that suggested someone had indeed been trying doors and windows, except there were no doors or windows to try. The women's prints led to the center of the lot and stopped, while the man's prints continued in a wide circle before disappearing toward the creek. I followed them with my flashlight until they reached the water's edge, where they simply ended. No sign of anyone crossing the ice or walking along the bank. Back at the station an hour later, I tried calling the number back. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. I checked our call log and found the incoming number listed as 5550147, a number that didn't exist in our area code. The next morning, when Linda returned to work and the phones were working again, I asked her to research 1247 Riverside Drive. That address was destroyed in the flood of '69, she said, pulling out a thick binder of historical records. The whole lower section of Riverside Drive got washed away when Raccoon Creek overflowed. 7 houses were completely destroyed, including the Kostadinov place. She showed me photographs from the aftermath, muddy foundations, debris scattered for miles, families standing beside piles of lumber that had once been their homes. In one photo, I recognized the elderly woman who'd called me. Ivanka Kostatinov, age 67, standing next to her husband beside the ruins of their house. What happened to the Kostadinov family? Ivanka drowned in the flood. Body was never recovered. Linda flipped through more pages. Her husband Dmitry moved to Columbus to live with his sister after the funeral. Died in 1974. I stared at the photograph, remembering the voice on the phone. Clear, frightened, asking for help with an intruder who might have been just as dead as she was. Linda, has anyone ever reported calls from that address before? She pulled out another folder, this one labeled Anomalous Incidents. Inside were reports dating back to 1971, all describing emergency calls from 1247 Riverside Drive. Different officers, different years, but the same story. Ivanka Kostadinov calling about intruders, asking for help that never came in time. Officer Walsh had responded to one such call in 1978. His report described finding the same empty lot, the same footprints in the snow, the same dead radio when he tried to call for backup. But Walsh had made a crucial mistake. He'd asked for the caller's phone number and tried to verify her identity. According to his report, Mrs. Kostatinov had become agitated when he questioned her. "You don't believe me," she'd said. "You think I'm lying. But I can see you right now, Officer Walsh. You're standing in my living room, dripping snow on my carpet." Walsh had been standing in the empty lot when she said this, 50 yards from where any living room could have existed. The calls had continued every winter for the next 3 years, always during major storms. Each time, Mrs. Kostadinov claimed she could see the responding officer inside her house, describing their actions and appearance with disturbing accuracy. Officers reported feeling watched while investigating the empty lot, and several developed severe anxiety about working night shifts during snowstorms. The phenomenon had stopped in 1981 after Officer Henderson made the mistake of asking Mrs. Kostatinov why she thought she could see him. "Because you're in my house," she'd replied. "You're all in my house now. Every officer who's ever come to help me. You're sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking about how to solve my problem." Henderson's final report was nearly incoherent. He claimed to have seen figures moving in the empty lot, shadowy forms that looked like police officers from different eras, all walking around the foundation stones as if they were patrolling rooms that no longer existed. He'd watched them for 20 minutes before fleeing the scene and requesting immediate transfer to another department. Chief Brennan instituted the 4th protocol after Henderson left, Linda explained. No responses to calls from that address, and absolutely no engagement with the caller beyond logging the report. But what if she really needs help? What if someone actually is trying to break into her? Whatever she is. Linda closed the folder and looked at me seriously. "Officer Kola, Ivanka Kostadinov has been dead for 27 years. Whoever or whatever is making those calls, it's not someone we can help. And based on what happened to the officers who tried, it's not someone who wants to be helped." That night, alone in the station during another winter storm, I received 2 more calls from 1247 Riverside Drive. I followed protocol, logged them as false reports, didn't ask questions, didn't try to verify information. But I couldn't stop thinking about the fear in Ivanka's voice, or the possibility that somewhere in a house that no longer existed, an elderly woman was still waiting for help that would never come. The second call ended with her saying something that made me glad I'd followed protocol. "I understand now, officer. You can't help me because you're already here. You've been here all along, ever since the first time someone answered my call. Thank you for keeping me company." After that, I made sure never to work alone during snowstorms. The fifth protocol nearly cost me my sanity during the summer of 1999. If livestock are found arranged in perfect circles on any property within the township, do not photograph the scene or attempt to move the animals. Contact the Ohio State Veterinary Emergency Response Unit immediately and establish a perimeter of at least 200 yards. Under no circumstances should you count the animals in the formation or attempt to determine a pattern. If a property owner insists on staying to watch, escort them to the county line and strongly suggest they remain away for 48 hours. The Buchanan Farm incident started with a call from Earl's nephew Danny, his voice cracking with panic through the dispatch radio. "Something's happened to Uncle Earl's cattle," Danny stammered. "You need to get out here right now. I can't even describe what I'm seeing." Earl Buchanan ran 200 head of Black Angus on a spread that had been in his family since the 1890s. The farm sat along State Route 374, about 8 miles southwest of town, bordered by rolling pastures that stretched toward the Hocking Hills. Earl was the kind of farmer who knew every animal by sight, could predict weather by watching how his cattle grouped together, and hadn't lost a head of livestock to disease or predators in over a decade. I found Danny standing beside his pickup truck at the farm's main gate, pale and shaking despite the 90-degree heat. He pointed toward the western pasture without saying a word. What I saw there defied every law of nature and animal behavior I'd ever learned. 47 head of cattle stood in a perfect circle in the middle of the pasture, each animal facing outward, motionless as statues. The circle was so precise, it looked like someone had used a compass and measuring tape to position every cow. Between each animal, the grass had been worn down to bare earth in straight lines that connected to form a complex star pattern inside the circle. But that wasn't the strangest part. Every cow was standing upright on its hind legs. "How long have they been like this?" I asked Danny, who was lighting his third cigarette with trembling hands. "Found them this way around dawn. I came to help Uncle Earl with the morning feeding, but he wasn't at the house. Figured he was already out checking the herd." Danny took a long drag from his cigarette. "His truck's here, but there's no sign of him anywhere." I studied the scene through binoculars from the fence line. The cattle weren't moving at all. No shifting weight, no swishing tails, no signs of distress. They simply stood there in their bizarre formation, balanced on 2 legs like people wearing cow costumes. Their eyes were all closed, and their heads tilted back at identical angles, as if they were looking at something in the sky. "Danny, I need you to drive back to town and wait at the diner. Don't come back here until I call you." "What about Uncle Earl?" "I'll find him. But right now, I need to secure this scene." After Danny left, I called Chief Brennan and described what I was seeing. The silence on the other end of the radio stretched so long, I thought we'd lost connection. "Cola, I need you to listen very carefully," Brennan finally said. "Do not approach those animals. Do not count them. Do not take any photographs. I'm calling in a specialist team from Columbus. Chief, there's a missing person here. Earl Buchanan is nowhere to be found, and Earl will turn up. He always does. But if you break Protocol 5, we might lose a lot more than one farmer." I spent the next hour establishing a perimeter around the pasture, using orange road cones and police tape to mark a wide boundary. The cattle never moved, never made a sound. Even from 200 yards away, I could feel something wrong about the scene. A pressure in the air that made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly when I looked directly at the formation. The Ohio State Veterinary Emergency Response Unit arrived in 2 unmarked vans around noon. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, the team leader, wore a hazmat suit and carried equipment I'd never seen before. Devices that looked like Geiger counters crossed with television antennas. Officer Cola, "I understand you were first on scene," she said, setting up her instruments near the perimeter. "Can you confirm that the animals are still in the exact same positions as when you arrived? They haven't moved a muscle in 4 hours." Dr. Hoffman nodded and began taking readings with her strange equipment. The devices clicked and buzzed, their needles jumping erratically whenever she pointed them toward the cattle circle. "Electromagnetic disturbance is off the charts," she muttered to her assistant. "Gravitational anomaly readings are consistent with previous incidents." "Previous incidents?" She looked at me with the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much. "Officer, this is the 7th livestock arrangement we've investigated in Ohio since 1987. Always the same pattern. Animals positioned in precise geometric formations, exhibiting behaviors that violate basic physics, and always associated with temporary disappearances of property owners." "What happens to the owners?" "They come back. Usually within 48 hours. But they're different afterward." While Dr. Hoffman worked, I searched the farmhouse and barn for any sign of Earl. Everything looked normal. Coffee pot still warm on the kitchen counter. Newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle. Barn cats fed and content. Earl's truck sat in the driveway with the keys in the ignition, but his wallet and phone were missing. In the barn, I found something that made my stomach tighten. Scratched into the wooden wall beside the milking stalls were symbols that matched the ones I had seen carved into the dead oak on Black Run Road and in the basement of that Cleveland house years earlier. These marks looked fresh, carved with something sharp enough to bite deep into the weathered oak boards. But it was what I found in Earl's bedroom that really disturbed me. Pinned to the wall above his bed were dozens of aerial photographs, satellite images, airplane shots, even some that looked like they'd been taken from a helicopter. All showed his farm from different angles and at different times, creating a timeline that went back months. In the earliest photos, the cattle grazed normally throughout the pasture. But as the dates progressed, the animals began forming increasingly complex patterns. Straight lines, triangles, hexagons. The final photograph, dated 3 days earlier, showed the cattle arranged in a perfect spiral centered on the exact spot where I'd found them this morning. Someone or something had been orchestrating this for months. I was studying the photographs when Dr. Hoffman called my radio. "Officer Cola, please return to the perimeter immediately. We have a development." I drove back to find the veterinary team packing their equipment with urgent efficiency. The cattle formation had changed. Instead of standing on their hind legs, all 47 animals now lay on their sides in the same perfect circle, arranged like spokes of a wheel with their heads pointing toward the center. "Are they dead?" I asked. "No, they're sleeping." All of them entered REM sleep simultaneously 17 minutes ago. Dr. Hoffman stripped off her hazmat gloves and avoided looking directly at the pasture. "Officer, I strongly recommend that you and the property owner stay away from this location for the next 2 days. Our readings suggest that whatever caused this is still active." "What about Earl Buchanan?" "He's still missing." "Mr. Buchanan will return when the cycle completes." "They always do." After the veterinary team left, I maintained a watch on the property from a distance, checking every few hours to see if anything had changed. The cattle continued sleeping in their perfect formation, occasionally twitching their legs like dogs dreaming of running. At 3:47 a.m. on the second night, I received a call from Earl himself. "Officer Cole? This is Earl Buchanan. I'm sorry to bother you, but I seem to be lost." His voice sounded normal, but something about the cadence felt off, like he was reading from a script. "Earl, where are you?" "I'm standing in my south pasture, but nothing looks familiar. The stars are in the wrong places, and my cattle are, well, They're doing something I've never seen before. Earl, I need you to walk toward the road. Don't look at the cattle, just head for the fence line and meet me at your front gate. That's the problem, officer. I can't seem to find the fence. I've been walking for what feels like hours, but I keep ending up back in the same spot. I drove out to the farm immediately, but found the pasture empty except for the sleeping cattle. No sign of Earl anywhere. When I called his number back, it went straight to voicemail. The next morning, Earl walked out of Miller's Woods carrying a coffee cup and wearing the same clothes he'd disappeared in 3 days earlier. A farmer found him wandering along County Road 12, about 5 miles from his property, asking for directions to his own farm. When I interviewed him, Earl insisted he'd only been gone for about 20 minutes. He remembered going out to check on his cattle, then finding himself in an unfamiliar pasture where the animals were dancing in circles under stars that spelled out words. "What kind of words?" I asked. Earl stared out the window of the station, his eyes unfocused. "Instructions," he said quietly. "They were instructions for something I'm supposed to do, but I can't remember what." Within a week, Earl's cattle had returned to normal grazing patterns, but Earl himself never fully recovered. Neighbors reported that he spent hours each night standing in his pasture, staring at the sky and moving his lips like he was having a conversation with someone they couldn't see. 6 months later, Earl sold his farm to a development company and moved to Florida. The last time I spoke with him, he mentioned that he still had dreams about his cattle dancing under alien constellations, and that sometimes he woke up to find crop circle patterns drawn in the condensation on his windows. The new owners of the Buchanan property reported no livestock incidents, but they did find something interesting when they bulldozed the old barn. Buried beneath the foundation were hundreds of animal bones arranged in the same star pattern the cattle had formed in the pasture. Bones that carbon dating later revealed to be over 200 years old. Dr. Hoffman's final report, which Chief Brennan showed me months later, contained one detail that still gives me nightmares. The electromagnetic readings from the pasture had detected 17 distinct gravitational signatures during the incident, one for each of the 16 previous property owners dating back to 1847, plus Earl Buchanan. According to her theory, something in that pasture had been collecting farmers for over a century and a half, adding their knowledge to an ever-growing consciousness that understood animal behavior better than any human ever could. The thought that Earl might still be out there somewhere, teaching something ancient and hungry about the patterns that govern living creatures, kept me awake for weeks. The 6th protocol transformed my understanding of No Field itself during the autumn of 2003. If the courthouse clock tower chimes 13 times at any hour, immediately evacuate all municipal buildings and establish a command post at the fire department on Elm Street. Do not re-enter the courthouse, police station, or city hall until the clock returns to normal operation. Anyone inside municipal buildings during the 13th chime may experience temporal displacement and should be quarantined for 24 hours upon their return. The incident started during what should have been a routine Tuesday afternoon. I was finishing paperwork at my desk when the courthouse clock began its 3 p.m. chime sequence. The old Seth Thomas Tower clock had been installed in 1897 and rarely kept perfect time, but it had chimed reliably on the hour for over a century. That day, instead of stopping at 3 chimes, it continued 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then, after a pause that stretched just long enough for me to think it had finished, came the 13th chime. The sound hit differently than the others. Deeper, more resonant, like it was coming from inside my chest, rather than from across the street. Every piece of electronic equipment in the station flickered, the coffee maker sputtered, and the old radiator in the corner started ticking in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. Linda looked up from her dispatcher console with confusion. Did that clock just... 13 chimes, I confirmed, already reaching for the protocol sheet. We need to evacuate. According to the instructions, I had less than 5 minutes to get everyone out of the municipal complex before the effects became dangerous. Linda grabbed the emergency radio and our active case files, while I secured the evidence locker and armed the building's security system. We were halfway to the door when I realized Deputy Collins was still in the basement, updating our evidence database. I called down the stairs, but heard no response. The basement felt different somehow, the air thicker, charged with static that made my hair stand on end. Collins, we need to evacuate right now. Still no answer. I descended the narrow wooden stairs, each step creaking in harmony with sounds that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The basement housed our evidence storage, old case files dating back to the 1940s, and a small office where Collins had been working on digitizing records. I found the office empty, but Collins's coffee was still steaming on the desk beside an open evidence box. His computer screen showed a case file from 1962, a missing person report for a young girl named Rebecca Hartwell, who'd vanished from the courthouse during the custody hearing. The file contained dozens of witness statements describing how Rebecca had been sitting in the hallway, waiting for her parents when she simply wasn't there anymore. "Collins!" I shouted again, checking every corner of the basement. His jacket hung on the back of his chair. His car key sat beside his coffee, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard typing coming from the office. Rapid, steady keystrokes on a keyboard. But when I looked, the office was still empty. Collins's computer screen still showing the 1962 case file. The typing continued for another 30 seconds, then stopped. New text had appeared on the screen, added to Rebecca Hartwell's missing person report. Subject located in courthouse basement, October 14th, 2003, 3:13 p.m. Condition: temporal displacement confirmed. Subject reports being in hallway waiting for parents. Claims current date is March 17th, 1962. Recommends updating search protocols for municipal building incidents. I stared at the screen, recognizing Collins' writing style, but knowing he hadn't been in the room to type it. The timestamp showed 3:13 p.m., exactly when the courthouse clock had finished its 13th chime. Following protocol, I evacuated the building and established our temporary command post at the fire department. Chief Brennan arrived 20 minutes later with a grim expression and a thermos of whiskey-laced coffee. "How long was Collins in the basement when the chimes started?" he asked, setting up a folding table in the fire station's meeting room. "Maybe 10 minutes. He was working on the evidence digitization project." Brennan pulled out a thick folder labeled Courthouse Temporal Incidents and spread the contents across the table. Inside were dozens of reports dating back to 1923, all describing similar events triggered by the courthouse clock chiming 13 times. The pattern was consistent. Whenever the clock malfunctioned and chimed 13 times, people inside municipal buildings would experience what the reports called temporal displacement. Some disappeared for hours or days, returning with no memory of where they'd been. Others claimed to have been transported to different time periods, interacting with people and events from Millfield's past. The worst incident was in 1956, Brennan explained, showing me a police report written in faded carbon copy. The entire town council was meeting in the courthouse when the clock chimed 13 times. All 7 members vanished for 6 days. When they returned, they insisted they'd been attending the town meeting in 1889, voting on whether to incorporate Millfield as an official municipality. What did they remember from 1889? Everything. They provided detailed descriptions of people who'd been dead for decades, quoted conversations from town meetings that were documented in our historical archives. When historians checked their accounts, every detail was accurate. I studied more reports, noting the increasing frequency of incidents over the decades. The clock had chimed 13 times, only 3 times in the 1920s, but the rate had accelerated, twice yearly in the 1960s, monthly in the 1980s, and weekly by the late 1990s. Why is it happening more often? Best theory comes from Professor Walsh at Ohio University, Brennan said. He thinks the courthouse sits on what he calls a temporal convergence point, a spot where different time periods bleed through. The clock serves as some kind of anchor, keeping past and present separated. When it malfunctions, the barriers weaken. At 6:47 p.m., almost 4 hours after the initial incident, the courthouse clock began chiming again. This time it stopped at 6, exactly as it should have. Within minutes, my radio crackled with Collins' voice. "Officer Cola, this is Collins. I'm in the courthouse basement and something strange has happened." I found him sitting at his desk, staring at the computer screen in confusion. His coffee had gone cold, but otherwise everything looked exactly as I'd left it. "Collins, what's the last thing you remember?" I was updating the evidence database, working on a case from 1962. Then I heard typing, but I wasn't typing anything. He gestured at the screen. "Look at this report." Someone added information about Rebecca Hartwell, but I didn't write this. I read the new text again, the entry that had appeared while I watched an empty room. "Collins, what time do you think it is?" He checked his watch and frowned. "Should be around 3:30. I started working at 3:15, maybe worked for 10 or 15 minutes before whatever this is. It's almost 7 p.m. You've been missing for nearly 4 hours. The color drained from his face. "That's not possible. I was just here, working on the files. I heard someone typing. Then you called my name from upstairs." Over the next 24 hours, we kept Collins under observation as protocol required. During that time, he exhibited several disturbing symptoms. He would start conversations about people he'd never met, referring to courthouse employees who died decades before he was born. He mentioned meetings and decisions from town council sessions that had occurred in the 1960s, speaking about them as if he'd been present. Most unsettling was his insistence that Rebecca Hartwell's case had been solved. According to Collins, he'd personally witnessed the little girl's return to the courthouse hallway in 1962, had seen her parents crying with relief as they were reunited. When I showed him the official case file, which still listed Rebecca as missing and presumed dead, he became agitated. "That's wrong," he insisted. "She came back. I was there. I watched her father carry her out of the building." Then, after a long pause, his expression changed. "But I wasn't there. I wasn't even born until 1971. How can I remember something that happened before I existed?" The answer came from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a temporal physics researcher from Case Western Reserve University, whom Chief Brennan had consulted on previous incidents. She interviewed Collins extensively and provided a theory that kept me awake for weeks. Deputy Collins experienced what we call retroactive consciousness, she explained. When the temporal barriers weakened, his awareness was briefly displaced to 1962, where he occupied the consciousness of whoever was investigating Rebecca Hartwell's disappearance at that time. He retained those memories when he returned to the present. So he actually solved a case from 40 years ago. In a sense, yes. The information he added to the database appears to be accurate. We've verified several details through historical records and witness interviews from 1962. Rebecca Hartwell did return safely, but for unknown reasons, the resolution was never properly documented. Dr. Rodriguez's research revealed an even more disturbing pattern. Cross-referencing courthouse incident reports with solved cases showed that several cold cases had been mysteriously updated with accurate information following 13 chime events. Officers from different decades had been contributing to each other's investigations across time, creating a shared consciousness that transcended normal temporal boundaries. The courthouse has become a kind of temporal hub, Dr. Rodriguez concluded. Past and present law enforcement officers are collaborating to solve cases, but they're doing it unconsciously during moments when time itself becomes fluid. This revelation changed how I viewed every case that crossed my desk. How many crimes had been solved by officers who hadn't been born when they occurred? How many missing persons had been found by investigations that spanned multiple decades? The most chilling thought was that somewhere in time, another version of myself might be working cases that wouldn't be committed for years to come, adding information to files that existed in a future I'd never lived to see. Collins recovered completely within a week, but he requested transfer to the sheriff's department the following month. The last time I spoke with him, he mentioned that he still sometimes remembered details from investigations he'd never worked, cases from decades he'd never experienced. "Sometimes I wake up knowing things about people who disappeared before I was born," he told me. "It's like Millfield won't let any case stay unsolved, no matter how much time has to pass to make that happen." After Collins left, I made sure never to be alone in the courthouse basement when the clock tower was due to chime. The seventh and final protocol was written in my own handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it. If you begin to see your own patrol car in locations where you know you are not, do not investigate. If dispatch receives radio calls and your voice reporting incidents you did not witness, immediately request backup and proceed to the county line. Under no circumstances should you respond to reports of yourself committing illegal activities. You are experiencing temporal echo displacement and are no longer safe to work alone in Millfield Township. I discovered this protocol during my final year of active duty, written on the bottom of the yellowed paper Chief Brennan had given me 29 years earlier. The ink was faded, the handwriting shakier than my usual script, but undeniably mine. The first incident occurred on a foggy November morning in 2023, 2 weeks before my scheduled retirement. I was conducting routine patrol along County Road 23 when I saw my own cruiser parked beside Miller's Cemetery. Same make, same model, same unit number painted on the doors. Even the same dent in the rear bumper from where I'd backed into a fence post the previous spring. The logical explanation was that the county had purchased identical vehicles and I was seeing Deputy Collins's car. But Collins had called in sick that morning, and when I radioed dispatch for confirmation, Linda told me all other units were accounted for and none were in my sector. I parked 50 yards away and observed the duplicate cruiser through binoculars. The engine was running. I could see exhaust vapor rising in the cold air. The driver's door stood open, and someone had placed orange traffic cones around the vehicle in the same pattern we used for crime scenes. After 20 minutes of watching, a figure emerged from behind a large headstone. Even at a distance, I recognized my own uniform, my own posture, my own way of carrying equipment. The other me walked to the cruiser, got inside, and drove away toward town without seeming to notice my presence. I followed at a distance, but the duplicate vehicle vanished when it reached the intersection of County Road 23 and State Route 374. One moment it was there. The next, it simply wasn't. No side roads to turn onto, no places to hide. Just gone. That afternoon, Linda mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Weird call came in around 10:30, she said, reviewing the log. Mrs. Patterson reported seeing Officer Cole placing evidence markers around her husband's grave in Miller's Cemetery. But you were on patrol in Sector 4 at the time, nowhere near the cemetery. Did she say what kind of evidence markers? Orange cones and crime scene tape. Said you were taking photographs and talking on your radio. She was concerned because her husband died of natural causes 15 years ago. I checked my patrol log and confirmed that I'd been investigating a minor traffic accident on the other side of the township when Mrs. Patterson's call came in. There was no way I could have been in two places simultaneously. The incidents escalated over the following weeks. Dispatch received radio calls in my voice reporting crimes that hadn't occurred. Security cameras at the courthouse captured footage of me entering the building at times when I was documented to be miles away. 3 separate witnesses reported seeing me conducting traffic stops on vehicles that turned out to be empty when other officers arrived to assist. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when I received a call that my doppelganger had been spotted breaking into the abandoned Hartwell barn, the same property where the rookie had found something that made him quit the force. Chief Brennan insisted on responding to the call with me. We drove out to the Hartwell property together, finding the barn doors standing open and my patrol car parked in the overgrown driveway. The vehicle was identical to mine in every detail, down to the coffee stain on the passenger seat and the small crack in the windshield. "Cola, I need you to stay in the car," Brennan said, checking his service weapon. "Let me handle this." Through the barn's open doors, we could see a figure in uniform moving around inside, occasionally illuminated by the beam of a flashlight. The movements were familiar. The way I held my shoulders when concentrating, the methodical pattern I used when searching a scene. Brennan approached the barn carefully, calling out standard police commands. "This is Chief Brennan, Millfield Police. Come out with your hands visible." The figure inside stopped moving. After a long moment, my own voice answered from the darkness. "Chief, it's Officer Cole. I'm investigating reports of break-in activity. The perpetrator may still be on the premises." "Cole is with me. Come out of the barn immediately." "That's not possible, Chief. I've been here for the past hour, following up on evidence from the 1987 incident. I think I've found something important." Brennan looked back at me, his face grim. I could see him making calculations, trying to decide how to handle a situation that violated every principle of normal law enforcement. "What did you find?" Brennan called out. "Documents hidden in the loft. Reports from investigations that were never filed. Cases that connect to everything we've been dealing with. The missing hikers, the livestock incidents, the courthouse temporal displacement." My duplicate's voice carried clearly through the cold air. "Chief, these reports go back to 1847. Every strange incident in Millfield Township has been documented, and they're all connected. Come out and show me what you found." "I can't do that, Chief. If I leave this barn, the documents will disappear. That's what happened to Officer Henderson in 1989 and Walsh in 1978. They found the truth, but they couldn't bring it back with them. I watched Brennan struggle with the decision. Protocol demanded he treat the figure in the barn as a suspect, but the voice was clearly mine, reporting information that could solve decades of mysteries. "Cola, what's the last thing you remember before coming here?" Brennan called. Responding to a radio call about suspicious activity, dispatch said someone had been seen entering the Hartwell barn around 8:30 p.m. My duplicate paused. "Chief, what time is it now?" Brennan checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. "That's not possible. I arrived here maybe 20 minutes ago." "What date is it?" Another long pause. "November 14th, 2023. Today is November 28th. You've been missing for 2 weeks." The silence from the barn stretched so long, I thought my duplicate had vanished. Then, quietly, "Chief, I think I understand what's happening. This barn exists in multiple time periods simultaneously. I'm not breaking in. I'm investigating a case that spans decades. But every time an officer gets close to the truth, they become part of the phenomenon." "What truth?" "No Field Township isn't just experiencing supernatural incidents. It's creating them. Every strange event, every temporal displacement, every missing person, they're all connected to something that was built into this place from the beginning. The protocols we follow aren't protection, they're instructions. We're not preventing these incidents, we're maintaining them." Brennan drew his weapon, though I could see the reluctance in his movements. "Come out of the barn, officer. We'll sort this out at the station." "I can't come out, Chief. If I do, I'll forget everything I've learned, just like Henderson and Walsh. But I can tell you this. Reginald Cole, sitting in that patrol car right now, needs to retire immediately. If he stays in No Field much longer, he'll become part of the system permanently." I looked at Brennan, seeing my own confusion reflected in his face. "Chief, should I—" "Stay in the car," he ordered, then called toward the barn. "What happens if Officer Cole retires? Then maybe the cycle breaks. Maybe someone else gets the chance to figure out what's really happening here without becoming part of it." My duplicate's voice was fading, as if he was moving deeper into the barn. "The protocols we follow, they're not protecting the community from these incidents. They're protecting the incidents from the community." "I don't understand." "Every protocol ensures that we respond to these events without disrupting them. We never investigate too deeply, never stay too long, never ask the right questions. We're not police officers, Chief. We're maintenance workers, keeping a system running that's been operating since before this town was incorporated." The flashlight beam in the barn went out. Brennan waited another 5 minutes, then cautiously entered the building with his weapon drawn. He emerged 20 minutes later, shaking his head. Empty. No sign anyone was ever inside. He holstered his weapon and walked back to our cars. "But there's something you need to see." In the dirt beside the duplicate patrol car, someone had written a message in letters large enough to read from our position. "Retirement is the only exit." The duplicate cruiser vanished while we were examining the message, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. That night, Chief Brennan sat with me in the station and showed me the 7th protocol, written in my own handwriting on the bottom of the original protocol sheet. "When did I write this?" I asked. "You didn't. At least, not the you sitting here right now." Brennan folded the paper carefully. "Officer Cole, I'm accepting your retirement effective immediately. Clean out your desk tonight, and don't come back to Millfield except to visit family. What about my replacement? What about training Deputy Collins? Collins will learn the protocols the same way you did, but you've reached the point where staying becomes dangerous, not just for you, but for everyone around you." As I packed my personal items, I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, expecting to see another version of myself watching from the shadows. The feeling persisted until I crossed the county line with my belongings loaded in my personal truck, leaving No Field behind for what I hoped would be the final time. The scanner radio sits on my kitchen table in Columbus, tuned to the Millfield police frequency. Old habits die hard, and despite Martha's complaints about the constant chatter, I can't bring myself to turn it off. Some nights, when the atmospheric conditions are right, I catch fragments of radio traffic that remind me why I needed to leave. Deputy Collins sounds different now, older, more careful with his words. He follows the protocols religiously. I can tell from the way he reports incidents, always vague enough to avoid attracting outside attention, specific enough to keep the department functioning. He's learned the delicate balance required to work in a place where normal rules don't apply. Last week, I heard him respond to a livestock disturbance on the old Buchanan property. New owners, same patterns appearing in their pastures. Collins handled it exactly right. Called for the veterinary response team, established the perimeter, waited for the cycle to complete. The farmer will probably move away within 6 months, just like Earl did. What worries me are the calls I don't hear. Radio silence during certain hours, missing patrol reports from specific sectors, incidents that get logged as resolved without any explanation of how. Collins is following the protocols, but the protocols themselves seem to be evolving. Martha found me listening to the scanner at 3 a.m. last Tuesday, writing down timestamps and incident numbers in a notebook I didn't remember starting. "Reginald, you're retired," she said, gently closing the notebook. "Whatever's happening in the note field isn't your responsibility anymore." She's right. But knowing that doesn't make sleep come any easier, because I understand now what my duplicate tried to tell Chief Brennan in the Hartwell barn. The protocols weren't created to solve problems. They were created to maintain them. Every strange incident in No Field serves a purpose, feeds into a system that's been operating since before the town was incorporated. The German settlers who first cleared those forests in the 1840s didn't just leave behind graves. They left behind something that learned to mimic their administrative processes, something that discovered how to use bureaucracy and routine to sustain itself across generations. The protocols ensure that each supernatural incident gets just enough attention to keep it stable, but never enough investigation to disrupt the larger pattern. Deputy Collins called me directly 2 weeks ago, violating protocol by using his personal phone instead of going through official channels. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice strained, "I need to ask you something, but I can't do it over the radio." "What's wrong, Collins?" "I found something in the courthouse basement. Evidence boxes that weren't there yesterday, containing case files I've never seen before, reports about incidents that haven't happened yet, written in my own handwriting." "Collins, listen to me very carefully. Put those files back exactly where you found them and don't open them again. Request vacation time and get out of Millfield for at least a week." "Sir, some of these reports are dated next year. They describe missing persons cases, livestock incidents, temporal displacement events. If I can prevent these things from happening..." "You can't prevent them, Collins. Those reports exist because the incidents are going to happen, whether you try to stop them or not. The files are instructions, not warnings." "But sir, one of the reports describes your replacement. Someone named Detective Sarah Morrison, transferred from Columbus PD next spring. The report says she'll ignore Protocol 3 and disappear in Miller's Woods during her first month." I've been calling Columbus PD weekly since that conversation, trying to find out if they have any plans to transfer a Detective Sarah Morrison to rural assignments. So far, no luck. But the bureaucratic wheels turn slowly. The worst part is knowing that even if I warn her, even if I manage to prevent her transfer to Millfield, something else will adjust to maintain the balance. Another officer will be assigned. Another person will learn the protocols and become part of the system that sustains itself through carefully managed supernatural incidents. Sometimes I dream about returning to Millfield, walking into the police station, and burning those protocol sheets. But I know it wouldn't matter. The protocols exist now in the minds of everyone who's ever followed them, written into the institutional memory of a department that serves something far older than municipal law enforcement. Tonight, the scanner is quiet, except for routine traffic stops and noise complaints. Normal police work in a place where nothing is normal. Collins sounds tired but professional, following procedures that keep him safe, while maintaining a system he doesn't fully understand. I've started writing down everything I remember about my time in Millfield, every incident, every protocol, every detail that might help someone else recognize the pattern. Martha thinks I'm working on memoirs, but this isn't nostalgia. This is documentation for whoever comes after Collins and whoever comes after them, because Millfield will always need police officers, and those officers will always need to understand why certain roads shouldn't be patrolled after midnight, and why some cases are meant to stay closed. The scanner crackles with static, then falls silent again. In the distance, thunder rumbles across Columbus, but I know it's not a storm approaching. It's just Millfield, maintaining itself one protocol at a time.